We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph and Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 7a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was dealing with the part of the Mishnah which said that by Yediyas HaTumah, the person brings a carbon olav v'yored, and the Gemara asked what exactly is happening with this person that's Tameh. What is he doing that's the actual violation? And the Gemara said in the previous Amud, we're talking about Tumas Mikdosh v'Kadoshav, and the idea is that since by Tumas Mikdosh v'Kadoshav, if it's done on purpose, so then the punishment is kares, so then if it's done by mistake, the person brings a carbon olav v'yored. The Gemara says, well, how do you know it's Tumas Mikdosh v'Kadoshav? Maybe what it actually is the person ate truma when he was tameh, and the Gemara says that since by truma the punishment b'mezid, if it's done on purpose, is not going to be kares, but it's actually misa b'dei shamayim. So generally speaking, it's kares which is associated with bringing a carbon b'shogeg, and not misa b'dei shamayim. But the Gemara now continues and asks, but maybe that's different over here, where the carbon is a carbon olav v'yored. As the Gemara continues, olav v'yored and nasi. Maybe when it comes to a carbon that's olav v'yored, so then even in a situation where it's not kares, maybe there we would say that b'shogeg you would bring the carbon olav v'yored. Again, a carbon olav v'yored is a sliding scale carbon, depending on how wealthy, that's the kind of carbon chatos that the person is going to bring. And the Gemara continues and says, midi dehave ashmias kol v'abitoy sefasayim. We find this by other scenarios where again you bring a carbon olav v'yored even though the punishment b'mezid is not kares, and that would be by shmias kol. Shmias kol is talking about when a person takes a false oath that he does not know testimony in a certain case. Bitoy sefasayim also involves a false oath, and so in those cases you bring a carbon olav v'yored again, even though there is not a situation of kares over there if it's done b'mezid. And so the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Kra, the reason why we know that it's not truma is because the pasuk says ba, it says within it, and ba l'mu'ute truma, so the word ba comes to exclude truma. The full pasuk over there is o chayiga betumas adam l'chol tumaso asher yitma ba v'nela mimenu v'yadav yashim, talking about a person becoming tameh. We understand it to mean ba v'lo betruma. Rashi explains midi dehave ashmias kol. Maybe we should say similar to shmias kol. Again, that's talking about Shevuos ha'edus. That's the oath. Again, someone takes a false oath. He doesn't know testimony. U'Shevuos bitoy, also a false oath. De'isnu nami b'carbon olav v'yored. Those cases also, there's a carbon olav v'yored. Ve'in onesh al zidonan lo misa v'lo kares. Over there, if you do it on purpose, you don't get misa or kares in those situations. And the Gemara said, Amar Kra, the pasuk says ba, it says the word ba. L'chol tomaso asher yitma ba b'inyana to olav v'yored ksiv. This is written in the context of olav v'yored, so again that comes to exclude truma. But the Gemara continues and asks, Eima ba l'mu'ute mikdash, but maybe ba is actually coming to exclude a situation of mikdash. Maybe in that situation you're not going to bring the carbon olav v'yored, and maybe what it means is the lo sagile b'carbon olav v'yored. Maybe it's not enough to bring a carbon olav v'yored when it comes to Tumas mikdash. Admaisi carbon kavui, you have to bring a carbon kavui, you have to bring the fixed regular carbon chatas. And Rashi explains, Ve'ema chiyuva b'truma, maybe the chiyuv really is by truma. Uba l'mu'ute mikdash, and ba is coming to exclude mikdash. And the idea would be that since if you do it on purpose by mikdash, being mitame mikdash, we say that the punishment is kares, so maybe lo tizki leba olav v'yored, maybe it's not enough to have the olav v'yored, the sliding scale carbon. Ela kavua lo asher lo anishava, maybe it has to be a carbon kavua, the same carbon, whether the person is wealthy or poor. And the Gemara continues and answers to that, Kari Rava aled de Rebbe. Rava called about Rebbe, Dola mayim miborus hamukim, that he was somebody who was able to bring up water from the depths, from the deep pits. The idea is that he was able to darshan properly, and that's how he knew specifically that when we're talking here about carbon olav v'yored, we're talking about Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav, and we're not talking about Truma. And where did Rebbe understand this? The Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa, Rebbe says, Ekra ani chaya behema lama nemra. If it says chaya, so why is it that it needs to say behema? Nemar kan behema tmeya, it says over here behema tmeya, v'nemar lahalan behema tmeya, and it says further on behema tmeya, ma'lahalan Tumas Kodesh, just like over there it's Tumas Kodesh, Afkan Tumas Kodesh. So to over here, it is Tumas Kodesh. And Rashi explains, Oled de Rebbe mishum dehu yolef lashaper. The reason we're talking about Rebbe is because he's the one that has that drasha. And what is Rebbe talking about when he says Ekra ani chaya bekarban olav v'yored ksiv? This is talking about the pasuk that's written by carbon olav v'yored. It's talking about becoming tameh. It says O benivlas chaya tameya, O benivlas behema tameya. The person is becoming tameh with nivlas chaya tameya, the nevela, the carcass of a wild animal that's tameh, or by a behema. V'dayim hayisi kore benivlas chaya tameya. Rebbe's point is, it would have been enough just to write Benivlas Chaya Tameya. Shenichtav Rishon, that was what was written first. It doesn't really need to write Behema. Sharei Behema Bechlal Chaya, because Behema is included in a Chaya. Shenemar, as it says, Zos HaChaya Asher Tochelu, it says this is the Chaya that you can eat. V'samach leikol Behema Mafreses Parsa, then it goes on to talk about Behema. So Behema can be subsumed under the category of Chaya. And so therefore, why does it say Behema Tameya if it's not really necessary? And so therefore, Rebbe said, V'nemar lahalan ba'ochel kadoshim b'tumas haguf. That pasuk further on is talking about somebody who eats kachim when he is tumas haguf, b'tzav esaron and tzav, nefesh kisiga v'chol tamei b'tumas adamo b'behema tameya, v'yachal mi b'sar zevach hashlam. It talks about eating from the b'sar zevach hashlamim over there. And so therefore, since over there it's talking about tumas kodesh, that's really how we know that we're talking about tumas kodesh over here. And so the Gemara now continues and says, Eshkechon tumas kodesh. Okay, we find the source for tumas kodesh. Tumas mikdash minalan. Where do we have the source for tumas mikdash with this carbon olav yored? And so the Gemara says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, B'chol kodesh lo siga, v'el hamikdash lo savu. It says you can't touch kodesh, and he's not able to come into he can't enter the Beis Hamikdash. Iskash mikdash lo kodesh. In this pasuk, you see a comparison between the Beis Hamikdash and kodesh, and so therefore, once we make that comparison, just like there's the carbon olav yored by kodesh, person eats kodesh, so too that is true when it comes to entering the Beis Hamikdash when he is tamei. But the Gemara continues and says, Ihachi, if that's true, if that's so, Truma Nami, well, you can have the same comparison by Truma. If you're saying that there's a comparison between Mikdash and Kodesh, you can make a comparison between Truma and Kodesh as well. The Omar Mar, because the Master said, B'chol Kodesh lo siga, that when it says in the Pasuk, B'chol Kodesh lo siga, l'rabos es Truma, that comes to include Truma. So you see that Truma is referred to Kodesh. And so therefore, how do you know that you should be including Mikdash and not Truma? And so the Gemara says to that, Hamiyat Rachmana ba. The Gemara says, no, that's the exclusion of the word ba. So the word ba comes to exclude Truma. But still the Gemara asks, Ema ba l'mutei Mikdash. Maybe the word ba, we should say, excludes Mikdash. How do you know it excludes Truma? We're really back to our original question. And the Gemara says to that, Mistabra Mikdash lo mematin. And it makes sense not to exclude Mikdash, Shekain b'kares kamosa, because that's the same punishment of kares as Kodesh, so we wouldn't exclude that. But the Gemara says, Adrab, on the contrary, Truma lo mematin, and let's not exclude Truma, Shekain achila kamosa, because that's a case of eating. You're eating Kodesh, you're eating Truma, so still we don't really know why it is that we're specifically excluding Truma. And so the Gemara continues and answers, Elo amar Rava, rather Rava says, Shalosh krisos b'shlamim, it says kares 3 times by shlamim. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Lama, why does it say kares 3 times by shlamim? Achas lichlal, one is for the generalization, the achas liprat, and one is for the specification, the achas letuma haksuva b'torah stam, and one is for tuma, which is written in the Torah stam, and doesn't explain particularly what we're talking about. It's ve'eni yodei amai, I don't know exactly what kind of tuma you're liable for. Haveomer tumas kodesh, so we're going to say that it's tumas kodesh. V'meino inyan l'tumas kodesh, the nafkalei midarebi. Now, if we don't really need it for tumas kodesh, because we just said above, we learned that out from Rebbe's drasha, that if the person is tamei and eats kodesh, that there's that liability. So teneu inyan l'tumas mikdash. So instead, you should apply it to tumas mikdash. And Rashi explains, Shalosh krisos b'shlamim, it says kares 3 times by shlamim, ba'ochlan b'toma. This is talking about eating the shlamim when the person is tamei. Achas be'emor la kohanim, one is in Parashas Emor, kol ish asher yikrav mikol zarachem el hakodshim. V'yaminim bezvachim v'perik ravi daha yikrav achilahu. When it says over here yikrav, it's talking about achil, it's talking about eating. Umio yikrav beroy lahakrava shehuktash bekli. When it says yikrav, it means it's roy lahakrava, that it was sanctified in a vessel. Ushtayim b'tzav esaron, and the 2 other times it says kares is in Parashas Tzav, v'hanefesh asher tochel mibsar zevach hashlamim. That's one pasuk. V'samach le v'hanefesh kisiga b'chol tamei u'v'tarvayu ksiv v'nichur. So by both of those, it says kares as well. So why does it say 3 times kares by shlamim? So achas lichlal, one is for the generalization. Hahidel hakodoshim shekol alas hakol. That's including all kodshim. V'achas min hashtayim leprat, and one is to specify, talking about the shlamim. Umidazu nidreshes b'toras kohanim b'tchilas hasefer. This is a drasha that's in Toras Kohanim. Davar shahaya bechlal v'yotzem min haklal alamed. That we have something as a generalization, and then you have a specification. You darshan as follows: Keitzad haso v'hanefesh asher tochal mibsar zevach hashlamim v'halo shlamim bechlal kol hakodshim hayu. Isn't shlamim included in all other kinds of kodshim? V'lama yotze. Why is it that shlamim is specified? Lahakesh aleim, to make the following hekesh comparison: Ma shlamim miyuchadin kodshay mizbeach. That just like the shlamim is kodshay mizbeach, that's specifically a carbon that is brought in the mizbeach. Af kol kodshay mizbeach. So too, when we're talking about eating the kodshem betuma, we're talking about things that are offered on the mizbeach. Yotzu kodshay berek habayis, that would exclude something that's sanctified for the repair of the Beis Hamikdash. She'ein chayav and alein misham tuma. That already there would not be a chayav because the person is tummy. Now Rashi over here notes, Vim Tomer, you might ask as follows: Lama ein nidonim b'chlal uprat. If you have a klal uprat, it's not a klal uprat uklal, it's a klal uprat. When you have a klal uprat, the general rule is ve'ein b'chlal elamasha b'prat, that we only include what was specified, and therefore it will be shlamim in midi achrina lo. It would only be shlamim and nothing else. Why are we including all kadshay mizbeach over here? The answer to that is mishum de meruchakin zeh mizeh b'shnei inyanim. They're distanced from one another in two different topics. The kach mefurish b'menachos b'per kol ha'menachos bos matzah. That's also explained in Meseches menachos. De'echad de prat meruchak min haklal. If it's distant from the klal, nidon b'midah zula lamid ala klal. Then you're going to do this kind of limud that you're going to say again. It refers to all things that are similar, like kadshay mizbeach. And Rashi continues and asks, Vim Tomer, if you're going to ask, Ma bein zu lamidas klalu pratu klal, well, what's the difference between what we're doing over here and a standard klalu pratu klal, shato don ke'ein haprat? There we also say that it's anything similar to the prat. That seems very similar to what we're doing over here with the klalu prat by the shlomim. And so Rashi continues and explains, Harbe yesh shamidas ke'ein haprat bola hosif al haprat b'chlal achron. When you have a klalu pratu klal, so that adding on ke'ein haprat, we're just adding on a bunch of items based on that last klal. Again, in the klal upratu klal, dvar macherim shein ksuvim bo. There we're adding on things that were not even written over there. Vizuba legalos al haprat. But over here, when we're talking about just a klal uprat, which is revealing some halacha, that's really just revealing something about the prat. V'lo lahosef olav, not to add on to it. Udvarim ravim lemeidin b'midazu she'enon boin b'midas ke'en haprat. And from this kind of limud, when you're doing legalos al haprat, you can learn a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily learn from a ke'en haprat when you're just extending and adding on other cases. And Rashi gives an example of that as well. Kagon b'havara, for example, when it comes to havara, when it comes to malachas on Shabbos, so you have all of the general malachas, and then you also have havara that is specified by the Torah. Sha'anu omrim l'chalik yotzas, and we say the reason why it's specified is it tells us the rule of l'chalik, that you're chayiv on each av independently. Uva midah zuhi ba havara b'chlal ha'is, and it's the same basic midah as we're saying by the shlomim, that havara is part of the generalization. V'lama yotza, why was it specified? L'hakashay leo l'galos al kol haklal. It's to make this comparison and say that the following applies to everything within the generalization. Shekashem shechayiv al havar b'fnei atzma, just like you're chayiv on havar independently, kach chayiv al kol av malacha shebechlal b'fnei atzma, that's true by every av malacha. And so therefore, in a certain sense, what Rashi is saying, when you have this klal uprat, where it's v'loma yotzasa, it's in a certain sense even more expansive, because it's teaching you something about the entire klal. But in another way of looking at it, when you're looking at a klal upratu klal, that can be looked at as more expansive, because you're adding on cases that were never included before. But the Gemara continues and asks, how can you say that the three kares is by Shlomim, that's the source for Tumas Mikdash? Isn't that needed for the teaching of Rabbi Avo? Diyam Rabbi Avo, because Rabbi Avo says, Shalosh krisos b'Shlomim lama. Why does it say the three kares is by Shlomim? Achas lechlal v'achas leprat. Again, one is for the generalization, one is for the specification, as we just said above. V'achas ledvarim she'enon necholin, and the other one is for items that are not normally eaten. We'll see Rashi in a moment on that. Ul Rabbi Shimon, and according to Rabbi Shimon, Da'amar Rabbi Shimon actually says that items that are not normally eaten, there is no liability of kares if a person eats those items when he's tameh. So still we need that third kares by shlomim leisuye chatos hapnimis. It's coming to include rather the inner chatos, which maybe you would think there's no liability. Because one might have thought, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon said anything that is not brought on the outer mizbeach like a shlomim, he says ein chayav in all of mishum pigel. So there you're not liable in terms of pigel. That's if it's offered with the wrong intention. So you might have thought mishum tuma nami lo, that when it comes to tuma also something that's not in the mizbeach hachitzon, it shouldn't be included in that liability. Kamash malon de mechayev. So that's what it's teaching us over here. Again, that third kares by shlomim is teaching that even by chatas hapnimis there's a liability according to Rabbi Shimon. But the point is that it's still necessary for one of these teachings, and therefore it should not be able to be used to teach us Tumas Mikdash. And Rashi explains L'dvarim she'eina nechol, and what does it mean? Items that are not normally eaten. Could go in eitzim shel ma'aracha. Let's say the wood on the ma'aracha of the mizbeach, that's not normally eaten. U'levona ketores, the ketores, they're not normally eaten. Imachlan b'tumah chayiv. So the pasuk is teaching by having kares by shlomim, is teaching that if a person eats those in tumah, the person is chayiv. And then the Gemara said, well, according to Rabbi Shimon, that's not true. There is no liability. So what's it teaching us? Again, it's teaching us the chatas hapnimis. Hoel v'yam Rabbi Shimon. Rashi says, since Rabbi Shimon says that chatos hapnimios, the inner chatases, kagon par usor shel Yom HaKippurim, that would be referring to the bull or the goat of Yom Kippur, upar koin Mashiach, and the par of the koin Mashiach, upar helam dover, and the par helam dover, shetuunin hazoya b'fnim, all of those, you need to sprinkle the blood inside the Beis HaMikdash, ala paroches, ve'al mizbeach hazav, on the paroches, which is the curtain that separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kadashim, and also on the mizbeach hazav, the inner mizbeach. So again, there's no pigel over there, kishlamim, because it has to be like a shlamim, mishum de pigel b'shlamim ksib, because pigel, that violation of pigel, is written by shlamim. That's again when there's the wrong intention. So Yolef Rabbi Shimon Minosha Eina no heges bechatos apanimios. Rabbi Shimon learns from there that that doesn't apply to the chatos apanimios, and so therefore again you might have thought that's true by tumah as well. So that's why it's coming to teach us that by the chatos apanimios there is this violation, the same violation if a person eats that betumah. So again we're back to our question: what is the source for tumas mikdash? And so the Gemara continues and says, "Ala amri nahardoi mishmei de Rava." Rather, they say in nahardoi in the name of Rava, shalosh tumos b'shlamim. Lama, why does it say tumah 3 times by shlamim? Achas leklal v'achas leprat. One is for the generalization, one is for the specification. V'achas letumah haksuva b'torah stam v'eni yodei amai. And one is for the tumah which is mentioned in the Torah, but I don't know specifically what it's talking about. Haveomer tumas kodesh. We could say that it's talking about tumas kodesh, but v'yemeinu inyan tumas kodesh. Again, if it's not necessary, because we already know tumas kodesh, the nafkalim the Rebbe, we learned it out from again Rebbe's teaching above. So teneu inyan tumas mikdash. So then you can apply it to tumas mikdash. And Rashi explains shalosh tumos. It says tumah 3 times. That's bahanach shalosh krisos ksiv. That's the same by the same 3 choruses that we just mentioned. It says bechol chad. It says in every single one it's written v'tumaso olav. It says the words v'tumaso olav. So just like it says the shalosh krisos, it also mentions shalosh tumos over there. But the Gemara still continues and asks, "V'hainami mi boile." But those 3 tumas, those are also necessary. You can't learn from there because I did the boy lemichtav kares lichid Rabbi Avo. Because once it needs to say the kares 3 times for Rabbi Avo's teaching. So kasav nami tumah. So it also says the word tumah. The losagi labalafachi, because you just can't not write that because that's the context that we are discussing. And so still we're back to the need for a source for tumas mikdash. Elamar Rava, rather Rava says asya tumaso tumaso. The source is that it says tumaso ksiv hacha. It's written over here lechol tumaso. Rashi says ksiv hacha ba'ola v'yored. Again by the carbon ola v'yored. It says lechol tumaso. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Zayin Amid Beis.